Hilchos Bikkurim Ushar Matnes Kahuna Shebagvulin Perek Shlishi. The laws of the first fruits and the other gifts to the Kohanim given to them in the land of Israel, chapter 3. We continue talking about Bikkurim. This class is being pre-recorded for the second day of Shavuos, which is called the holiday of Bikkurim, day of the first fruits. So to be learning about the first fruits on the holiday of the first fruits, some tremendous hashgacha pratis, some divine providence right there. And while yesterday we discussed the basic parameters of Bikkurim, what is meant to be brought, where do you bring it from, today we move on to some of the details that govern the presentation and the consumption of the Bikkurim. Who gets them, how and where do you eat them, how do you present the Bikkurim, and a very unique law that's called Lina. At the end of the chapter we'll see that a Jew who brings Bikkurim was actually supposed to spend the night in Jerusalem, and some of the other details that come along with that. So the Rambam begins, Halacha Aleph, HaBikkurim, the first fruits. Noisnin oisan le'anshe mishmar. They were meant to be given to the people of the watch. What does that mean? The Cohen families, of course the tribe of Levi was where the original Cohen families came from, and as they grew, there were many, many Kohanim. How did you decide who served in the temple? So King David and Shmuel the prophet divided all the Kohanim into 24 groups. One group would serve per week on a rotation. So every 24 weeks, your group, your family would serve in the Holy Temple. And whoever was the mishmar of that week, whoever were the Kohanim that were serving in the temple that week, they got the first fruits. And they divided between themselves, like they do with any other like they do with any other sacrifices brought in the temple during their week, where it's divided among all the people serving currently. We already explained that Bikkurim in the Torah are called truma. Therefore, if a non-Kohen eats Bikkurim anywhere, he's liable to death at the hands of heaven, a very severe punishment, like for consuming truma. That's only provided that he eats them after they had already entered the wall of Jerusalem. In other words, they were in a way sanctified already, and now the non-Kohen eats them. That's where it's really bad. Halacha beis hayu miktasan bifnim umiktasan bachutz. If part of the Bikkurim were still outside of Jerusalem, but part of them were already inside, zesha bifnim chayavin alav misa. So we divide it in half. The part that's inside, you're liable to the death penalty for it. It's considered completely holy for all matters. What remains outside is completely ordinary for all matters till you bring it in. Halacha Gimel, Kohen she'achal bikurim chutz l'Yerushalayim. Me'achar shenichnasu lifnim min ha'chayma. If a Kohen consumed bikurim, if he ate them outside of Jerusalem once they entered the wall of Yerushalayim, loikem min ha'Torah. You get biblical lashes, shenemar, because the verse says, Lo yisuchal lechol bisharecha. The Torah has a whole list of things you're not allowed to eat just anywhere in your gates, just anywhere in Israel. You have to eat them in Yerushalayim. And the last thing on the list is usru mas yadecha, that which is raised by your hands. Vehema bikurim kamesha bi'arnu b'hilchos truma, which, as we explained earlier in this book, in the laws of truma separation, this very verse is referring to bikurim, because the regular truma is already discussed in other verses. This one is referring to bikurim, and it says you can't eat it just anywhere in your gates. You have to eat it in Yerushalayim. So too, even if a Kohen would eat them in Yerushalayim, so long as he did so before it was actually placed down in the temple courtyard, he gets biblical lashes as though he would have eaten them outside of Yerushalayim. Because one of the essential requirements of Bikkurim is that the basket of fruit be placed down on the temple courtyard floor. Shanemar, as it says, V'hinachtoi lifnei mizbach Hashem elekecha. This is very interesting. I looked even in the accurate manuscripts of the Rambam. This is how the verse is quoted here. V'hinachtoi lifnei mizbach Hashem elekecha. Even though in the Torah, as you see highlighted, it says V'hinachtoi lifnei Hashem elekecha. There's no word mizbach. In a different verse, it says V'hinichoi lifnei mizbach Hashem elekecha. But the Rambam, as it's even in the most accurate in the Rambam Frankel, where they usually have the highest level of precision, they quote the verse as it's a conglomerate. V'hinachtai lifnei mizbach Hashem elekecha. The point is, either way, in the verse it says you have to put it down in front of the mizbeach of Hashem your God. It's a requirement. It's an essential requirement. So if the Kohen ate the Bikkurim before that was done to them, it's like eating it outside, and he's liable to the penalty. Halacha daled u'mishiyanichem hameviyim. Ba'azara, once the person bringing them puts them down in the temple courtyard, hutru la kohen, At that moment, they become permitted for consumption to the Kohen. Va'afal pi sha'adayin lo hisvada alein. Even though he hasn't yet recited the declaration, which we'll learn about today at the end of the chapter and tomorrow at length, even though he didn't say the declaration, the putting it down makes it permitted. She'ena kriya ma'akevas achilasan, because the reading is not essential to the eating. Once you put it down, you can eat it. Reading it is an extra bonus. If Bikkurim left their partitions, in other words, they were brought into Jerusalem, they left Jerusalem, they came back, mutarin ba'achila, now they're in Yerushalayim, you're allowed to eat them. Halacha hey achilas Bikkurim ka'achilas truma l'chol dvarav. The Kohen's consumption of Bikkurim is exactly like his consumption of truma for all matters. The way it has to be eaten, the fact that it can only be eaten in ritual purity, etc. Yeser ba Bikkurim, there's an additional stringency in Bikkurim over and above Truma, Shehei Nasurin La'ainin, where they're forbidden to somebody who's in deep mourning, U'tu'unin Havas Makam, and they have to also be brought to Yerushalayim, V'koyin Toher, Sha'achal Bikkurim Tmeim, Loike. And also a pure Kohen who ate ritually impure Bikkurim will get lashes. Kashem Shalaike Yisrael Toher, Sha'achal Ma'aser Sheni Shenitma. The same way a regular Jew would get lashes if he was pure and he ate Ma'aser Sheni that was impure. Masha'enkin b'truma. All these stringencies we just listed don't apply to truma. They actually all do apply to Ma'aser Sheni, which is the last set of laws. Ma'aser Sheni cannot be eaten by a person in deep mourning. Got to bring it to Jerusalem. You can't eat it impure. Those stringencies that apply to Ma'aser Sheni and not to truma apply to Bikkurim as well. Halacha vav u'minayin sha'Bikkurim asurin la'einen. How indeed do we know that Bikkurim are forbidden to a person in deep mourning? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah specifically. Says the Rambam, Shaharei Nemar Bahen v'samachta b'chol ha'toiv. At the end of the passage, discussing Bikkurim, Torah says you should be happy with all the good that Hashem has given you. Miklal, that implies shehu chayav la'achlon b'simcha. They have to be consumed, they have to be eaten in a state of joy. Loi ba'aninos, not in a state of deep mourning. V'ha'eichlan ba'aninos, if a person does eat them in this state, since at the end of the day, the prohibition is not clear in the Torah, makinese makas mardos, we can only give you rabbinic lashes, not biblical lashes. Halacha zayin, habikurim tu'unin kli. Here's another requirement that the bikurim need to have. They have to have an accompanying a vessel, container. They have to be brought in a container. Shenemar, the verse clearly says, you take the fruit, v'samta vatena, and you put it in the basket. It's even the choicest mitzvah to bring every individual species in its own container. If you brought them in one container, it's still okay. But even then, you shouldn't bring them mixed. You should go in the following order: barley on the bottom, wheat on top of them, oil on top, olives on top of them, utmarim al gabeim, dates on top of them, v'rimainim al gabeim, pomegranates on top of them, ute'enim l'mayla min hakel, and figs should be above everything. V'yiyah davar echad mafsik bein min v'min, there should be a partition between every species, hutzin, b'chelef, b'olin, b'chayetze behen, maybe some palm leaves, some wild grass, some other leaves, or things like that. U'makif late'enim, eshkoyle shel anavim mibachutz. And then the grape clusters should go around the figs on the outside of the basket. That's if you're going to present it in one basket, that's the order you should follow. Again, ideally, individual baskets, but if you have to put it together in this way. Now that Rambam tells us about these utensils. Heviam bikli matchais, if the person had brought the bikurim in metal containers, noitel hakoyen habikurim, the chayzer akli lebailav, then the Kohen takes just the fruits, and the utensil, the container, goes back to its owner. But if the person had brought the bikurim in a wicker basket or in a willow basket, then in this case, both the first fruits and the baskets go to the Kohanim. If the bikurim became impure, the baskets don't belong to the kohanim. The Rabbi has a fascinating, lengthy discussion on this halacha because the Talmud uses this halacha to make the observation: basar anya azli aniyusa. Poverty follows the poor. In English, they say the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Right? Because who can afford to bring metal containers? Richer people, and they bring the bikurim and they get the containers back. Poor people, they bring the wicker baskets, and the bikurim goes to the kohanim and the baskets. So Talmud observes, here you see the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. But the Rebbe, based on a whole bunch of precise wordings of the Rambam that he analyzes, he says that the Rambam is actually communicating a very different message when it comes to the utensils accompanying the Bikkurim. Because some commentaries understand it as a completely separate obligation. You bring the Bikkurim, you also bring the baskets. Some commentaries say that it's kind of like, it kind of merges. Once you're bringing the Bikkurim, you should also give the Kohen the baskets. Some say there's even an obligation to give them both together, the Bikkurim and the baskets. The Rambam wants to tell us that when you bring the Bikkurim in a basket, the basket literally becomes part and parcel of the Bikkurim. It becomes one entity. So much so, how the Rabbi learns the Rambam, so much so that by default, in every case, the basket should belong to the Kohen. Torah makes a special dispensation for people who bring metal containers, as the Rambam says, v'chayzer hakli l'baylav. It's an active thing. The Kohen takes the basket and he has to give back the utensil to the owner. When it comes to the poor people, actually their offering gets accepted fully. Habikurim v'hasalam l'kohenim, in one go, the bikurim and the baskets becomes the Kohen. When it comes to the metal baskets, the Torah says a special eye has to go back. Why? Because they aren't part of the fruit. Wicker and willow grow from the ground. So they can become much more one entity with the bikurim. Metal cannot. So in the end of the day, it's a different species. It's mineral, not vegetable. So it has to go back to the owners. But according to the Rambam's understanding, it's one entity. Chad mamish, as the Rebbe says. The bikurim and the salim become one big thing. And therefore, if they become impure, that's how much they're attached. If the bikurim become impure, the baskets don't go to the kohanim. Why? What's the connection? Let the bikurim be impure and the baskets be pure. No. Since the basket becomes one entity with the bikurim, whatever happens to the bikurim happens to the baskets. Halacha tes keshahayu meviin es habikurim. When the Jews used to bring the bikurim, hayu meviin biyadam toirin ubnei yoina, as a beautifying factor, they used to also bring birds. I asked AI to make this for me. They used to bring birds attached to the baskets. They would bring birds in their hands, birds that are eligible for sacrifices. They would also hang from the sides of the baskets these birds that were eligible for sacrifices. To beautify, to decorate the bikurim. The ones that were hanging on the basket would be brought as burnt offerings. And the ones in their hands would be given as a gift to the Kohanim as well. Halacha Yud mitzvah sasei lihisvades b'mikdash ala bikurim b'shah shemeviyah. Besides for bringing the bikurim, there's a special mitzvah to make a declaration in the temple about the bikurim when you bring them. And here we can see the full passage that the person would say. Torah says, "Ubasa ala kohen asher yeh bayamim lahem." You come to the Kohen in those days, v'amarta elav, and you say to him, "Higadati hayom." So the Rambam says, "Maschil v'koyre." You begin to read from here. Higadati hayom la'Hashem olekecha ki basi ala aretz v'goymer. I'm declaring before Hashem that I've come to the land. And then you go, Arami Oived Avi, talk a little bit about Jewish history. The Aramean, that's Lavan, wanted to destroy my father Jacob. Ad sheyigmer kol parsha, and you say the entire passage, Ad asher nasata li Hashem, till all the way over here. Thank you Hashem, I'm bringing the fruit that you gave me in this land. The ein koyrin oisa the b'lashon hakodesh. This reading must be done in biblical Hebrew. Shenemar ve'anisa ve'amartak. Right before it says in the green over here, you shall call out and you shall say. That means b'lashon hazois. You shall call out and you shall say exactly as we say in the Torah, in lashon kodesh. Halacha yud aleph barishayna, in the beginning, kol mi shayidei alikra is any Jew who was fluent, literate, and knew how to read, he would read. The chol mi she'enei yidei alikra is makri noisei. But Jews who didn't know how to read, they had to be read for. The Kohen would stand there, repeat after me, say the word in Hebrew and repeat after me. Nimnu elu she'ein yoidin likres milahavi. What happened? It was embarrassing. People who didn't know how to read stopped bringing Bikurim altogether, so they shouldn't be shamed. I don't want to be the one the Kohen has to read for. I don't know how to read Hebrew. Hiskinu bezdin sheyiyu makrin es mishu yedeya kemisha ene yedeya. Came the court out of sensitivity for these Jews, and they said, you know what, from now on, I don't care how big of a sage you are, the Kohen's going to read the verse, and you're going to repeat after them, so that all Jews will be equal and nobody will be ashamed to bring their Bikurim. Halacha Yud Beis. Hamevi es Bikurim. When somebody is bringing Bikurim to Jerusalem, yesh lo reshus litneim la'avdei ukroivei b'chol haderech ad shemagia laharabais. He has the option to hand them off to a slave or to a relative on the whole trip until they reach the Temple Mount. Once you reach a temple mount, the mitzvah was for the person to take the basket on his own, on his shoulder. Even if he was the greatest king in Israel, personally, take the basket on your shoulder. And you go in with it on the temple mount till you reach the temple courtyard. While the basket is still on your shoulder, you read the first verse. I declare before Hashem that I've come to the land that Hashem has promised us. And then you take the basket off of your shoulder and you hold it by its rim, by the edge of the basket. And the Kohen places his hands under the basket, you're presenting it to him, and you do a special waving procedure with the basket. The Koire, then the Jew reads the rest of the portion. The Aramean wanted to destroy my father, and my father Jacob went down to Egypt. Till you finish the entire portion. All this while the Kohen is holding it from under, and the guy is holding it by the edge. And then you put it down, right near the Mizbeach. Where's our picture before? Then the guy, here he is. You put it next to the Mizbeach on the southwestern corner, on the south side of the southwestern corner. You prostrate yourself in thanks to Hashem, and you leave. How do we know that the Bikkurim have to be waved? Usually only sacrifices have to be waved. Where do we see in the Bikkurim? Because it says, an extra verse, almost, extra wording. The Kohen should take the basket from your hand. This implies an inclusion of Bikkurim for being waved. The same way they have to be waved. They have to also be brought with a sacrifice, a peace offering, and special song. The Leviim, who were the singers in the temple courtyard, they had a special song that they would sing during this Bikkurim presentation. Because it says, you have to be happy with all the good. And on holidays it says you should be happy with your holiday. In the same way happiness and holiday, the Talmud derives, is referring to bringing a peace offering. Afkan bishlamim, so too here, it has to be brought with a sacrifice, peace offering. But the sacrifice isn't essential. You could bring it without a sacrifice after the fact. But ideally, it comes along with a sacrifice. When do we recite the song with it? The moment the people presenting the Bikkurim would come into the Azara, temple courtyard, the Levium would burst into song, and they would read Psalm 30, Tehillim Perek Lamed, Are Mimcha Hashem, Kidilisani. I exalt you, God, for you have raised me up. Halacha Yudalid, another requirement of Bikkurim. HaBikkurim Tu'unim Lina. Bikkurim require sleeping over. Ketzad, what does this mean? Hevi Bikurav Lamikdash Vikarav Vehikriv Shlama. Once the Jew brought the Bikkurim to the temple, he read the declaration and he brought the peace offering. Lo Yetze Ba'isei Hayom Yerushalayim Lachzer Limkayim. Don't just leave Jerusalem that day, go back home. Ela Yalin Sham, sleep over the night. V'yachzer Lemachar Le'irai, and go back the next day to your city. Shenemar, because it says, this is actually a verse by the holidays. It says Ufanisa V'Boiker V'Halachta Le'Yalecha. You do the sacrifice, do the thing, then in the morning turn back and go back to your tents. Kol Pinois Shata Paina Mina Mikdash Lichshetavaylai. Anytime you turn back from the temple, whenever you come to it, Lo Yiyu Ela Ba'Boiker, it should always be in the morning. In other words, always spend the night and then go home. As a summary of this entire chapter, it turns out Bikkurim Tu'unin Shiva Dvarim. That Bikkurim require 7 things. Havas Makim, brought to Jerusalem. Ukli, they have to be in a container. Ukriya, declaration. The Karban, a sacrifice. Vishir, the song of the Levium. Utnufa, and waving. Vilina, and sleeping over. And tomorrow we're going to discuss more at length the idea of a declaration. But these 7 things are generic to every single Bikkurim. You require them as part of their bringing ceremony.